My daughter's fiancé looked me straight in the eye at the rehearsal dinner and said I was nothing more than a pay stub and a tool belt. My name is Richard Thompson, and at 64 years old, I thought I'd earned enough respect to never hear those words. I was wrong. I've spent 42 years as an electrician and contractor in southern Ontario. Started with nothing but a beat-up truck and a box of tools. Built a business that wired half the commercial buildings in 3 counties. Along the way, I raised Sarah by myself, after her mother passed when she was just 7. Every wire I ran, every panel I installed, every late night I worked was for her. She was my whole world. Sarah grew up understanding the value of hard work. She saw me come home exhausted, saw me turn down hockey games with buddies to make her dance recitals, watched me stretch every dollar to make sure she could go to university without debt. She graduated with honors, got a good job in marketing at a firm in Toronto, and I couldn't have been prouder. That was my girl, I thought. Grounded, grateful, good. Then she met Marcus Sterling. The first time Sarah brought him to my house in Hamilton was on a Sunday afternoon last autumn. I'd made my usual roast beef dinner, the same meal I'd cooked every Sunday since she was a kid. Nothing fancy, just good food and better company. Or so I hoped. Marcus arrived in a BMW that probably cost more than I'd made in 2 years. He wore clothes that looked like they'd never seen the inside of a washing machine, the kind you only wear once before having them dry cleaned. When he shook my hand, his palm felt soft, unused. Not a callus on it. I didn't judge him for that. I know not everyone works with their hands. But it was what came next that started turning my stomach. We sat down to eat, and Marcus barely touched his food. He kept looking around my house with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not disgust, exactly, more like assessment. Like he was calculating the square footage and comparing it to some standard in his head. "So, Mr. Thompson," he said, cutting his roast beef into tiny, precise pieces, "Sarah tells me you're a tradesman." The way he said tradesman made it sound like he'd said janitor or garbage collector. Not that there's anything wrong with those jobs, but you could hear the condescension dripping off every syllable. "Electrician," I corrected. "Ran my own contracting business for 30 years. Just sold it last year." "Ah." He nodded slowly. "And this house? You've been here a while?" 28 years. Bought it for a song back then. Fixed it up myself. Added the garage, renovated the kitchen, put in all new electrical, obviously. Sarah jumped in, her voice bright, maybe too bright. "Dad's amazing with his hands. He can fix anything." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. How? Resourceful. That should have been my first real warning. Not the word itself, but the pause before it. The way he said resourceful when he clearly meant something else. Something less flattering, but I let it slide. Sarah seemed happy, and that was what mattered. She'd been dating Marcus for 8 months by then, and this was the first time I was meeting him. I wanted to give the man a fair chance. Over the next few months, I saw Marcus exactly 3 more times before the engagement. Each visit was brief, surface level. He'd show up, make small talk that felt like he was reading from a script, and then find a reason they needed to leave early. Important dinner with his parents. Work emergency. A friend's birthday party I wasn't invited to. Sarah, meanwhile, was changing. It started small. She stopped texting me good morning, something she'd done every day since she moved to Toronto. When I'd call, she'd answer but sound distracted. Our Sunday dinners became every other Sunday, then monthly. When she did visit, she'd spend half the time on her phone, responding to messages from Marcus. "He's just really busy with work," she'd explain whenever I asked why he couldn't join us. "His family's in the middle of some big business deal." The Sterlings, I learned, came from old Toronto money. Marcus's grandfather had made a fortune in real estate development in the 50s. His father, Philip Sterling, expanded that fortune into what Marcus called diverse holdings, but never quite explained. They had a house in Rosedale, a cottage in Muskoka, and, apparently, very specific opinions about who belonged in their social circle. I should have seen it coming when Sarah called me one Tuesday evening in March. "Dad," she said, and I could hear the nervous excitement in her voice. Marcus proposed. My first feeling was joy, pure, uncomplicated happiness for my daughter. My second feeling, the one that came about 3 seconds later, was dread. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I managed. Congratulations. We're planning the wedding for June. I know it's fast, but Marcus's parents have offered to help, and they know this amazing venue that just had a cancellation. And Dad, it's going to be perfect. June? That's only 3 months away. I know, but everything's falling into place so easily. It's like it's meant to be. I wanted to believe that. I tried to believe that, but something in her voice sounded off. Not unhappy, exactly. More like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. The wedding planning began immediately, and I barely saw any of it. Sarah would mention vendors and venues and color schemes in passing, but when I offered to help or asked to be involved, she'd deflect. Marcus's mom is handling most of it, Dad. She knows all the best people. What about what you want? This is what I want, she'd insist, but I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes when she said it. 2 weeks after the engagement, I got an email from Marcus. Not a phone call, an email. The subject line read, "Wedding Contribution." The message was formal, cold. It outlined suggested contributions from the bride's family, which apparently meant me, $40,000. Broken down into categories: venue deposit, catering, florals, photography, entertainment. At the bottom, in bold, it said, "Payment plans, available if needed." If needed? Like he was doing me a favor by allowing me to pay in installments for a wedding I hadn't been consulted about. I called Sarah immediately. "Did you know Marcus was sending me a bill?" "Dad, it's not a bill. It's just the traditional expectation that the bride's family contributes." $40,000. Sarah. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "I know it's a lot. Did you pick any of these vendors? Did you want a wedding that costs this much?" Marcus's parents have certain expectations. His mom has been so generous, planning everything. The least we can do is help with the costs. The least we can do? I felt my blood pressure rising. "Sweetheart, I sold my business to retire. I'm comfortable, but I'm not throwing around 40 grand on a single day. Please, Dad. This is important to Marcus." "What about what's important to you?" Another long pause. "This is important to me because it's important to him." That sentence haunted me for days. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. My daughter, who'd fought her way through university, who'd landed a competitive job through sheer determination, who'd never let anyone push her around, was now bending herself into shapes to please a man who'd sent her father an itemized invoice. But I paid it? God help me. I paid it. I emptied a chunk of my retirement savings and sent the money, because at the end of the day, it was Sarah's wedding, and I wanted her to be happy. I told myself it was an investment in her future, in her happiness. The invitations went out in April. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant script, the kind of formal invitation that made you feel underdressed just holding it. My name appeared exactly once, at the very bottom. Father of the bride, Richard Thompson. No mention that I'd paid for a third of it. The wedding was set for the second Saturday in June at some manor house north of Toronto. 200 guests, a 5-course dinner, a live band that apparently played at celebrity weddings, the kind of event that got mentioned in the society pages. I should have been excited. Instead, I felt sick every time I thought about it. The problem started 3 weeks before the wedding. Marcus called me directly this time, which should have been my warning that something was seriously wrong. "Richard," he said. "Not Mr. Thompson, just Richard, like we were old college buddies. We need to discuss the guest list." "What about it?" "Well, there's been some concern about your plus one. I'd put down Jenny Kowalski as my date. She was a nurse I'd been seeing for about 6 months. Nothing serious yet, but we enjoyed each other's company. She was kind, funny, and she'd been excited to meet Sarah." "What concern?" "It's just that Mother has been very careful about the seating arrangements, and she's planned for you to sit at the family table. Bringing a date complicates things." "You're telling me I can't bring a date to my daughter's wedding?" "I'm saying it might be easier if you came alone, less complicated." "Did Sarah approve this?" A pause. "Sarah understands." I called my daughter immediately after hanging up. She answered on the 4th ring. "Dad, I know what you're going to say. Then you know it's ridiculous. It's just that the seating's already been finalized, and Marcus's mom worked really hard on it, and I don't want to upset her this close to the wedding. What about upsetting me? Dad, please, can you just do this one thing? For me? I heard the exhaustion in her voice. The defeat. This wasn't about seating arrangements or Jenny Kowalski. This was about something bigger, something that had been building for months. But I didn't have the words to articulate it then, and Sarah didn't have the strength to hear it. Fine, I said. I'll come alone. Thank you. She sounded relieved, but also sad. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. 2 weeks before the wedding, another email. This one was about my attire. Apparently, I needed to rent a morning suit from a specific tailor in Toronto. The rental was $1,200. For one day, to wear clothes I didn't pick and would never wear again. I drove into the city, got fitted by a man who looked at my measurements like they offended him personally, and handed over my credit card. The tailor assured me I'd look presentable. The week before the wedding, Sarah came by my house. It was the first time she'd visited in over a month, and she looked exhausted, thinner than I remembered, with circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. You okay? I asked, as she sat down at the kitchen table. Just stressed. Wedding planning is a lot. Thought Marcus's mom was handling it all. She is. That's part of the stress. Sarah laughed, but it sounded hollow. She has very specific ideas about everything. And what are your ideas? She looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for a second, I saw my little girl again. The one who used to help me sort screws in the garage, who'd hand me tools and ask a million questions about how electricity worked. The girl who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. I wanted something smaller, she admitted quietly. Just family and close friends. Maybe outdoors, somewhere simple. But Marcus says this is important for his family's reputation. That we need to make the right impression. On who? His parents' business associates. His mother's social circle. People I've never met and probably won't see again after the wedding. Sarah, I know what you're going to say, Dad, but I love him. And sometimes love means compromising. Compromise goes both ways. She didn't respond to that. We sat in silence for a moment. The same kitchen table where we'd eaten countless meals had hundreds of conversations. I wanted to tell her to call it off, to run, to remember who she was before Marcus Sterling entered her life. But she was 29 years old, a grown woman, and I'd raised her to make her own choices. I'm here if you need me, I said instead. Always. She squeezed my hand. I know, Dad. Thank you. She left an hour later, and I had a terrible feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away. The rehearsal dinner was the night before the wedding, held at the Sterling family's home in Rosedale. I'd never been to Rosedale before. Didn't know addresses like that existed in Toronto. The house was massive, 3 stories of limestone and glass, with a circular driveway and landscaping that probably cost more than my entire house was worth. I arrived in my truck, suddenly very aware of how out of place I looked. A valet, an actual valet, took my keys with a barely concealed look of disdain. Inside, the house was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. About 40 people milled around with champagne flutes, their conversations a low murmur of wealth and privilege. I recognized maybe 5 of them, all from Sarah's side. The rest were Sterlings or Sterling adjacent. Marcus's family, his parents' friends, business partners, people who belonged in magazines. Marcus found me within minutes. Richard. He gripped my hand too firmly, his smile too wide. Glad you could make it. Come, let me introduce you to my parents. Philip and Victoria Sterling were exactly what I expected. Him in a suit that probably cost $5,000, her in a dress that cost twice that. They looked at me the way you might look at a stain on expensive carpet, visible, unfortunate, hopefully temporary. Mr. Thompson, Philip said, not bothering to hide his once-over of my off-the-rack blazer. Marcus tells us you're in the trades. I'm retired. How fortunate for you. Victoria's smile was carved from ice. And you raised Sarah by yourself, isn't that right? Her mother passed when she was young. How tragic. She didn't sound like she thought it was tragic. She sounded like she thought it explained something. Well, Sarah certainly landed on her feet, didn't she? Marcus will be able to provide her with opportunities she might not have otherwise had access to. The implication hung in the air. Without Marcus, without his money and his family name, Sarah would be nothing. Just a working-class girl with a dead mother and a father who worked with his hands. I swallowed my response and excused myself to find Sarah. She was in the corner, surrounded by Marcus's sisters and their husbands, laughing at something that didn't seem that funny. When she saw me, relief flooded her face. "Dad!" She hugged me tightly. "I'm so glad you're here. You okay?" "Fine. Just a lot of people." She lowered her voice. "Marcus's family can be a bit much." "A bit? Dad, please. Just for tonight, can we just get through this?" Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 50. Long table, place cards, multiple forks I didn't know the purpose of. I was seated between Marcus's uncle, who spent the entire meal discussing his yacht, and one of Victoria's friends, who asked me exactly 2 questions before deciding I wasn't worth her time. The food was probably excellent. I wouldn't know. I couldn't taste anything past the growing anger in my throat. After dinner, Philip stood to make a toast. He talked about family, legacy, the Sterling name. He talked about Marcus's accomplishments, his degree from Western, his position at the family company. He talked about Victoria's impeccable taste and her success in planning this beautiful wedding. He didn't mention Sarah's name until the very end, almost as an afterthought. And of course, we're pleased to welcome Sarah into our family. I'm sure she'll make Marcus very happy. Not that they'd make each other happy, that she'd make him happy, like that was her job. I watched Sarah's face across the table. She was smiling, but her eyes were somewhere else, somewhere far away. When Philip finished, he raised his glass. Everyone else followed. I lifted mine halfway, enough to not cause a scene, and took the smallest sip possible. That's when Marcus stood up. "I'd like to say something," he announced, his cheeks flushed from champagne. "Tomorrow is going to be the most important day of my life, and I couldn't be here without the support of my incredible family. Mother, Father, thank you for everything you've done. For this house, for this dinner, for making sure everything is perfect." He paused, looked around the room. His eyes landed on me for half a second before moving on. "I'd also like to acknowledge the contributions from Sarah's side. I know it's been an adjustment, merging our 2 very different worlds. But I think tomorrow will prove that love can bridge any gap." He smiled at Sarah. "Even between Rosedale and Hamilton." The room laughed, polite, knowing laughter. The kind that comes when everyone's in on the joke except the punchline. My hands tightened around my glass. Marcus continued, "In all seriousness, I want to thank Richard Thompson for his financial contribution to tomorrow's celebration. I know it was a stretch, but your sacrifice means a lot." More laughter. Someone actually clapped. "After all," Marcus said, his smile widening, "not everyone can say their wedding was funded by a pay stub and a tool belt." The room erupted. People laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Victoria actually put her hand over her heart like she might cry from joy. Philip clapped his son on the back. I looked at Sarah. Her face had gone white. She was staring at Marcus like she'd never seen him before. But she didn't say anything. She didn't stand up, didn't defend me, didn't tell her fiancé that what he'd just said was cruel and disrespectful. She just sat there, frozen, while the man she was going to marry tomorrow mocked her father in a room full of strangers. I stood up. The scrape of my chair cut through the laughter. "Richard," Victoria started, her voice sharp. "We're in the middle of toasts." "I know. I'm done listening." I walked out. Nobody followed me. Not Sarah, not Marcus, not a single person in that room. The valet brought my truck around, avoided eye contact, and I drove home in silence. My phone buzzed all night. Sarah calling, texting, apologizing. Marcus calling, not apologizing. Victoria calling, demanding I show up tomorrow or I'd embarrass the family. I didn't answer any of them. I sat in my garage until 3 in the morning, surrounded by my tools, my equipment, the things I'd built my life with, the things Marcus had reduced to a punchline. And I made a decision. I was going to that wedding, but not to smile for photos and pretend everything was fine. I was going to show Marcus Sterling and his family exactly who Richard Thompson was. And more importantly, I was going to show my daughter who Marcus Sterling really was. Because sometimes the best way to build something is to first tear down what doesn't belong. The wedding was at 2 in the afternoon. I showed up at 1:30, alone, in my rented morning suit that cost $1,200 to wear. The manor house looked like something from a movie, sprawling grounds, gardens in full bloom, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, facing an arch covered in roses that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to be. I nodded to a few people I recognized from Sarah's side. Her Aunt Carol, her college roommate Emma, a few cousins who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. We were the minority here, outnumbered 3-1 by Sterlings and their associates. Marcus's groomsmen were all cut from the same cloth, expensive suits, confident smirks, the kind of men who'd never changed a tire or fixed a leaky faucet. They stood near the house, laughing about something, occasionally glancing at their phones. Sarah was somewhere inside, getting ready. I'd texted her this morning that I was coming, that I loved her, that I'd be there. She'd responded with a heart emoji and nothing else. I found my seat in the second row. First row was reserved for parents. Philip and Victoria were already there, Victoria checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Philip scrolling through his phone. They didn't acknowledge me. The ceremony started exactly on time. The string quartet played something classical and expensive sounding. Marcus took his position at the altar with his best man. He looked perfect, like a groom from a magazine spread. Then Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle. She looked beautiful. Her dress was stunning, probably cost more than a car. Her hair was done in some elaborate updo, with flowers woven through it. But her eyes looked terrified. She was supposed to walk down the aisle alone. We'd discussed it weeks ago, some modern choice about not being given away like property. At the time, I'd agreed, not wanting to push. Now I realized it wasn't Sarah's choice at all. She walked slowly, mechanically. When she reached the altar, Marcus took her hand, whispered something in her ear. She nodded, but I could see the tremble in her shoulders. The officiant began. Standard ceremony stuff, love, commitment, partnership. I tried to listen, but all I could hear was Marcus's voice from last night. Pay stub and a tool belt. The laughter that followed. Then came the vows. Marcus went first. He talked about the moment he met Sarah, how he knew she was special, how he couldn't wait to build a life with her, how she'd elevated him to be a better man. Elevated him, like he was the one getting the better end of this deal. Sarah's turn. Her voice shook as she promised to love and honor him, to stand by his side, to build a home together. But I noticed what she didn't say. She didn't mention her own dreams, her own goals, her own identity beyond being Mrs. Marcus Sterling. If anyone here has objections to this union, the officiant said, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Of course there was silence. Nobody objects at real weddings. That only happens in movies. But then I saw him, standing in the back, half hidden behind one of the rose-covered columns. James Morrison, the city councilor from my old ward. I'd wired his offices 15 years ago, and we'd stayed friendly. Had beers occasionally, talked about local politics and hockey. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and waited. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked it discreetly. Watch this, the text said. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant announced. You may kiss the bride. Marcus pulled Sarah close and kissed her. The crowd clapped. The string quartet launched into something triumphant. It should have been a perfect moment. That's when James stepped forward from the shadows. Excuse me, he called out, his voice cutting through the music. I'm very sorry to interrupt, but there's something you all should know about this property. The music stopped. Heads turned. Marcus and Sarah broke apart, confusion on both their faces. Who the hell are you? Philip stood up, his face reddening. Counselor James Morrison. And I'm here to inform you that as of this morning, this property has been designated for historical preservation review, which means no private events, no gatherings, and no commercial use pending the completion of the review process. Victoria gasped. That's impossible. We have a permit. You had a permit. It was revoked at 8 this morning. James pulled out a document. I have the paperwork right here. All guests need to vacate the premises within the hour. The reception cannot proceed. Chaos erupted. Philip started yelling about lawyers. Victoria pulled out her phone, frantically calling someone. Marcus stood frozen at the altar, still holding Sarah's hand. Guests began murmuring, confused, some already standing to leave. Sarah looked at me across the rows of chairs. Her eyes were wide, questioning. I stood up and walked to the aisle. James met me halfway, and we shook hands where everyone could see. "Richard," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I got your message about the historical value of this property. The original stone foundation dates back to 1823. Real piece of Ontario history. Good thing you brought it to my attention. I'd done no such thing, of course. But I'd called in a favor, reminded James that I'd wired the new community center at cost when the city was over budget. Mentioned that this particular property might benefit from a closer look at its heritage status. Asked if there was anything that could be done about a private event happening today. James, bless him, had understood what I was really asking. Marcus finally found his voice. "You did this," he pointed at me, his face contorted with rage. "You sabotaged my wedding. I made a phone call about preserving history. Not my fault. Your venue didn't have its permits in order." "This is ridiculous," Victoria shrieked. "We paid for this location." "Then you'll want to discuss refunds with the owners," James said calmly. "I'm just here to enforce the city's regulations. Now, if you'll all please begin exiting the property." Guests started moving toward the parking area, some confused, some clearly annoyed at having their afternoon disrupted. The expensive string quartet packed up their instruments. The catering staff, who'd been setting up under a massive tent, started breaking everything down. I walked up to Sarah and Marcus. They were still standing at the altar, looking like actors who'd forgotten their lines. "Sarah," I said gently, "can we talk?" "Don't you dare," Marcus snapped. "You don't get to ruin this and then act like the good guy." "I didn't ruin anything. I just highlighted some city regulation issues. If your family had done proper due diligence on the venue, this wouldn't be a problem." Marcus took a step toward me, but Sarah put her hand on his chest. "Stop," she said quietly, then louder. "Both of you just stop." She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw tears starting to form in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I watched you disappear over the last year, because last night I sat in a room full of people who laughed, while Marcus mocked me, and you said nothing. Because you deserve better than a man who treats you like an accessory, and your father like a joke. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your father. And maybe I should have said something months ago, but I kept quiet because I thought you were happy. But you're not happy, Sarah. You haven't been happy since you met him." Marcus stepped between us. "Get out. You're not welcome here." "This isn't your property anymore," I reminded him. "It's a historical site pending review, which means nobody's welcome here, including you." "Dad," Sarah's voice cracked. "I can't believe you did this." "I did it because I love you, and because someone needed to show you who Marcus really is before you spent the rest of your life trying to be someone you're not." I turned to Marcus. "You called me a pay stub and a tool belt. You're right about one thing. I worked with my hands my whole life. Built things, fixed things, made things better. But you've never built anything. You just inherit money and pretend that makes you better than people who actually work for what they have. How dare you?" "I dare, because that pay stub and tool belt paid for a third of this disaster. Because I raised a strong, intelligent woman who you've spent a year turning into a quiet, anxious version of herself. Because I would rather have her angry at me for ruining her wedding than watch her make the biggest mistake of her life." Sarah was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Marcus had his arm around her, but she wasn't leaning into him. She looked lost. "Sweetheart," I said more gently, "you don't have to decide anything right now. But please, just think about whether this is what you really want. Whether he treats you the way you deserve to be treated. Whether you're marrying him because you love him, or because you've been convinced you should." I walked away before she could respond. As I headed toward my truck, I saw Philip and Victoria arguing with James, threatening lawsuits and political consequences. James looked unbothered. He'd been a city councilor for 20 years. He'd dealt with worse than angry rich people. I drove home in my ridiculous $1,200 suit and sat in my garage again. My phone stayed silent for 3 hours. Then, as the sun was setting, it rang. Sarah. Dad? I'm here, sweetheart. Silence on the other end. Then, can I come over? Of course. She arrived an hour later, still in her wedding dress, her face blotchy from crying. She sat at the kitchen table without saying anything. I made her tea, the same way I'd made it since she was 7 years old. Milk, 2 sugars. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. The reception was supposed to be at the same venue. Everything was there. The food, the cake, the band. It's all canceled now. The guests went home. Marcus and his parents spent 2 hours yelling at their lawyer. I'm sorry. Are you? She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Are you really sorry? I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm not sorry I stopped that wedding. You had no right. You're probably right. But I'd do it again. She shook her head. I don't even know what to feel right now. I should be furious with you. I am furious with you. But I'm also... She trailed off. Also what? Relieved. The word came out as a whisper. God, Dad, I'm relieved. And that's terrible, isn't it? I should be devastated that my wedding got canceled. But instead, I just feel this huge weight lifting. I reached across the table and took her hand. That tells you everything you need to know. But I love him. Do you? Or do you love the idea of him? The perfect life he represented? She pulled her hand back, wrapped her arms around herself. When we first met, he was so charming, attentive. He made me feel special. But then it changed. Slowly, so slowly, I didn't even notice. He started making little comments about my clothes, my friends, my job, suggesting improvements. And his parents. She laughed bitterly. His parents made me feel like I was never quite good enough. Not the right schools, not the right background, not the right class. And you thought marrying him would change that? I thought it would prove something. That I belonged in that world. That I was worth something. Sarah, you've always been worth something. You don't need to marry into money to prove you have value. She started crying again, harder this time. When he called you a pay stub and a tool belt, I wanted to stand up. I wanted to tell him to shut up, to defend you. But I just sat there. I let him disrespect you in front of all those people, and I said nothing. What kind of person does that make me? It makes you human. And it makes you someone who was in too deep to see the way out. He texted me 37 times on the drive over here, calling me ungrateful, saying I was throwing away our future because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention, blaming everything on you. I can handle being blamed, but it's not your fault. It's mine. I let this happen. I let him change me. I let his family make me feel small. I stopped being myself because I thought that's what love meant. Compromise. Accommodation. But you were right, it only went one way. She looked around the kitchen, at the table we'd sat at for over 2 decades. I miss this. I miss us. I miss Sunday dinners and your terrible jokes and feeling like I could just be myself without performing for anyone. You can always come home, sweetheart. Always. What if I can't face everyone? All those people who came today, who saw the wedding fall apart. Marcus's family is probably telling everyone I'm crazy, that you're unstable, that we sabotaged their perfect day. Let them talk. The people who matter will understand. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I need to call off the engagement. Officially. Return the ring. Figure out how to undo everything. You don't have to decide tonight. Yes, I do. Because if I wait, if I go back to that apartment and see him and listen to his explanations and his promises that things will be different, I'll convince myself to stay. I know I will. I'm good at convincing myself of things I want to believe. She pulled her phone out of her small wedding dress purse and typed something. Sent it. Put the phone face down on the table. There. I told him it's over. That I need space. That I'm sorry, but I can't do this. Her phone immediately started buzzing. Call after call. She turned it off. I don't know what happens now, she said. I don't know where I go from here. You figure it out. One day at a time. One decision at a time. But you do it as yourself, not as who someone else wants you to be. She nodded slowly. Can I stay here tonight? I can't go back to the apartment yet. You can stay as long as you need. Your room is exactly the way you left it. She laughed through her tears. Still with the posters from university, still with everything. We sat at that table until past midnight. Sarah still in her wedding dress, me still in my ridiculous suit. We didn't solve anything that night. We didn't make grand plans or profound declarations. We just existed in the same space, father and daughter, rebuilding something that had gotten lost along the way. The next morning, Sarah came downstairs in her old clothes she'd left in her room years ago. She looked younger, lighter, more like herself. "I need to get my stuff from the apartment," she said. "Face Marcus eventually. Want me to come with you?" "No. I need to do this myself." She paused. "But thank you. For everything. Even for ruining my wedding. Especially for ruining your wedding?" She smiled, small but real. "Especially for that." She left after breakfast. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. Those were long days, wondering if she'd changed her mind, if Marcus had convinced her to come back, if I'd lost my daughter in my attempt to save her. But then she showed up on Wednesday evening with 6 boxes of her belongings and a lighter look in her eyes. "I got my stuff," told Marcus face to face that we're done. He tried every manipulation tactic he had, begging, yelling, bargaining, blaming. But I held firm. She set down a box. His mom actually tried to offer me money to reconsider. $50,000 to go through with the marriage. Can you believe that? What did you tell her? I told her that's not how love works. That if she has to pay someone to marry her son, maybe she should think about what that says about him. I helped her carry the boxes upstairs to her old room. As we worked, she talked. About the apartment she was looking at. About how her boss had been supportive when she explained she needed some flexibility while dealing with a broken engagement. About her friends who'd reached out with support. Emma said she was relieved, Sarah mentioned. Said she'd been worried about me for months but didn't know how to say anything. A bunch of my friends felt the same way. They saw what I couldn't see. Sometimes we're too close to something to see it clearly. "I'm sorry I pushed you away this past year. Sorry I chose him over you so many times. You don't need to apologize. You were doing what you thought was right. Still, I should have listened when you had doubts. Should have paid attention to the red flags. You're paying attention now. That's what matters." Over the following weeks, Sarah slowly rebuilt her life. She found an apartment with her friend Emma, went back to her regular schedule at work, started going to the gym again, something she'd stopped doing because Marcus said he preferred she spend her evenings with him. Reconnected with friends she drifted away from. And every Sunday, she came for dinner, just like old times. About 2 months after the non-wedding, on a Sunday afternoon, we were sitting in the backyard when she brought it up. "I saw Marcus yesterday, at a coffee shop downtown." I looked up from the barbecue. "How was that?" "Awkward. He was with someone. A woman who looked like she could be Brittany's twin from your friend's story. Same assessing eyes. Same designer everything." "How'd you feel about it?" "Honestly, nothing. Maybe a little sad for her, but mostly nothing." "Is that terrible?" "That's healthy." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Dad, for the wedding thing. I know it was extreme, and probably cost you a lot in favors, and maybe even some friendships, but thank you. I needed someone to love me enough to take the choice away, just for long enough that I could see clearly. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "I know you would. That's why you're the best father anyone could ask for." "Even with just a pay stub and a tool belt?" She laughed. "Especially with a pay stub and a tool belt. Those are the things that built everything that matters." As the sun set over the backyard, I thought about that night in the garage when I'd made my decision. The risk I'd taken, the potential consequences. How it could have gone so wrong in so many ways. But it hadn't. My daughter was here, laughing again, herself again. That was worth everything. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's giving someone you love the chance to escape before it's too late. Even if it means becoming the villain in someone else's story. Because at the end of the day, my tool belt and pay stub built something more valuable than any mansion in Rosedale ever could. They built a relationship with my daughter that nothing, not money, not status, not even my own mistakes could truly break. And that's worth more than all the perfect weddings in the world.